When Roberto Herrera knelt in the ruins of his home, surrounded by mud-soaked walls and the haunting silence of emptiness, he didn't know that God was about to reveal his presence in the most unexpected way. That Christmas Eve would change everything. But to understand how they arrived at this moment of divine encounter, we need to go back to where this journey of faith truly began. 6 months earlier, the Herrera family lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. Roberto was 53 years old, an age that felt like a sentence in today's job market. Every time he walked past a construction site or a factory, he'd see younger men being hired, while managers barely glanced at his worn application. His calloused hands told stories of 3 decades as a master carpenter, a craftsman who could transform raw wood into furniture that seemed to breathe with life. But none of that mattered anymore. The world wanted youth, speed, efficiency. Experience had become invisible. His wife, Maria, was 48, with eyes that still sparkled despite the weight of worry that pressed on her shoulders daily. She had given up her dreams of finishing school to raise their children, Eduardo, who was 8 years old, and little Sofia, just 6. The children attended the neighborhood school, walking 20 minutes each morning with backpacks that were too big for their small frames. Eduardo was quiet and observant, always drawing in the margins of his notebooks. Sofia was the opposite, a whirlwind of questions and laughter that filled their small home with light even on the darkest days. Roberto would wake at 5 in the morning, putting on his only good shirt, and spend the day walking from workshop to workshop, factory to factory, carrying his leather tool bag that had belonged to his father. The leather was cracked now, the zipper held together with wire, but inside, his tools were immaculate. He'd cleaned and sharpened each one the night before the flood, as he did every Sunday, a ritual of hope that tomorrow might bring work. Maria tried everything. She offered to clean houses, to wash clothes, to cook for neighbors. Some weeks she'd earn enough for rice and beans. Other weeks, they'd water down the soup until it was barely more than flavored water. She never complained, at least not out loud. But Roberto would catch her staring at the empty pantry shelves late at night, her hand pressed against her mouth, as if physically holding back the despair that threatened to escape. The children sensed the tension. Eduardo stopped asking for new pencils when his broke, instead writing smaller and smaller to make each one last. Sofia learned not to mention the birthday parties she wasn't invited to, understanding without being told that there was no money for a gift to bring. They were growing up too fast, learning lessons about scarcity that no child should have to learn. Every Sunday, the Herreras walked to the small church 3 blocks away. It was an old building with peeling paint and creaking wooden benches, but inside there was a community that knew struggle intimately. Father Miguel, an elderly priest with hands as weathered as Roberto's, would speak about faith in the wilderness, about manna in the desert, about God's provision in impossible circumstances. Roberto would listen, wanting to believe, fighting against the voice in his head that whispered, "Where is this provision? Where is this God you speak of?" Maria held onto faith with both hands, like a rope in a storm. She'd pray while cooking, while washing clothes in the sink, while braiding Sofia's hair. Her prayers were simple, direct conversations with a God she trusted completely. Lord, give us our daily bread. Help Roberto find work. Protect my babies. Give me strength for one more day. She believed that God heard every word, even when the heavens seemed silent. Then came the rains. It started in late August, a downpour that didn't stop for 3 days. The river that ran along the edge of their neighborhood, usually a peaceful stream, became a roaring monster. Water rose through the streets like an invading army, unstoppable and merciless. The emergency sirens wailed at 2 in the morning, and Roberto grabbed Eduardo while Maria clutched Sofia, and they ran through waist-deep water to the evacuation center on higher ground. When they returned 4 days later, their home was destroyed. The flood had torn through like a vengeful hand, sweeping away furniture, clothes, kitchen utensils, Sofia's dolls, Eduardo's drawings, everything. The walls were covered in brown mud that stank of sewage and decay. The floor was buckled, the ceiling sagging with water damage. Their small television, which Roberto had saved for months to buy, was a useless shell filled with mud. Maria's few pieces of jewelry, inherited from her mother, were gone, swept away by the current. But worse than losing their possessions was what the flood took from their community. Dozens of families lost everything. The small workshops where Roberto occasionally found day work were underwater, the machinery ruined, the owners bankrupt overnight. The factory 3 miles away closed indefinitely. The construction company laid off everyone and left town. In one catastrophic week, every potential source of income disappeared like water through cupped hands. Roberto stood in the ruins of their home and felt something break inside him. He was 53 years old, too old to start over, too old to be hired, too old to rebuild from nothing. He looked at his hands, those strong carpenter's hands that could create beauty from wood, and they felt useless. What good was skill when there was no opportunity? What good was experience when no one valued it? The government provided emergency assistance, a modest cash payment that barely covered 1 month of rent, some basic food supplies, and blankets. They moved into a rental room in a building on the other side of town, a single room with a shared bathroom down the hall and a small electric burner for cooking. The 4 of them slept on thin mattresses on the floor, pressed close together for warmth as autumn turned cold. Roberto's job search became desperate. He'd take any work, any wage, any conditions. He offered to work as a janitor, a security guard, a delivery man. He'd stand outside home improvement stores at dawn with other men, hoping someone would hire him for day labor. Sometimes he'd get picked. One day carrying bags of cement, another day digging trenches. He'd come home so exhausted he could barely eat, his back screaming, his hands blistered, and Maria would massage his shoulders while tears ran silently down her face. The money from those scattered days of work went straight to food. There was never enough for rent, so they fell behind. 1 month, 2 months, 3. The landlord, a hard-faced woman named Senora Dominguez, would bang on their door demanding payment. Maria would open it just a crack, apologizing, promising, begging for more time. Next week, I promise. My husband is about to get steady work. But next week never came. Stay with this story until the end, and you'll witness a testimony that will strengthen your soul. Don't forget to leave a like. Eduardo and Sofia tried to be invisible. They learned to be quiet in the evenings when other tenants complained about noise. They learned to eat their small portions without asking for more. Eduardo would help his little sister with homework, using the dim light from the hallway, because they couldn't always afford to keep the room's single bulb on. Sofia stopped smiling as much. Her laughter, which used to fill every space, became rare and precious. Maria found occasional cleaning work through a woman at church, but it was unpredictable. 1 week she'd have 3 houses to clean, earning enough to pay some of the rent debt. The next week, nothing. She'd go days without eating, giving her portion to the children, telling them she'd eaten earlier, that she wasn't hungry. Roberto knew the truth. He could see her losing weight, see the hollows forming under her cheekbones. But what could he say? He was doing the same thing. The shame was almost worse than the hunger. Roberto had been a provider, a man who took pride in caring for his family. Now he felt like a failure, a man who couldn't even put food on a table they didn't have. When he'd see Eduardo wearing shoes with holes worn through the soles, or Sofia shivering in a sweater too thin for winter, something died inside him a little more each day. He stopped going to church. He couldn't sit there and listen to sermons about God's provision when his children were hungry. He couldn't sing songs about abundance when they had nothing. Maria would go alone with the kids on Sundays, and she'd come back quieter each time, the hope in her eyes dimming like a candle running out of wax. November arrived with biting cold. They couldn't afford heat, so they'd all sleep under the few blankets they had, wrapped around each other. Sofia developed a cough that wouldn't go away. Maria wanted to take her to the clinic, but they had no money for medicine. She'd hold her daughter through the night, feeling each painful cough shake the small body, praying prayers that felt like they stopped at the ceiling. Roberto's breaking point came on a gray morning in early December. He'd gone to a hiring fair at the community center, standing in line with hundreds of other desperate men. When it was finally his turn, the recruiter took one look at his age on the application and shook his head. "Sorry, we're looking for workers under 45. Insurance costs, you understand." Roberto had nodded, thanked the man, walked outside, and kept walking. He walked for hours, not seeing anything, not thinking anything, just moving because stopping meant collapsing. He found himself at a bridge over the river, the same river that had destroyed their lives. He gripped the railing and looked down at the dark water moving below. The thought came unbidden. How much easier would it be for Maria and the kids if he wasn't a burden? The insurance from his death could help them start over. They could go live with Maria's sister in another state, get a fresh start without a useless 53-year-old man dragging them down. He stood there as the sun set, the cold wind cutting through his thin jacket, that terrible thought growing louder in his mind. He was so tired, so bone-deep exhausted from fighting a battle he couldn't win. His hands gripped the railing tighter, his knuckles white. Then his phone rang. It was Maria. Her voice was small, worried. "Roberto, where are you? It's getting dark. Come home." He closed his eyes, and in that moment he saw Sofia's face, Eduardo's quiet eyes watching him. "I'm coming home," he said, his voice breaking. He turned away from the bridge and walked back to their single room, each step a conscious choice to keep going one more day. December arrived, and with it came the crushing weight of Christmas approaching. A season of celebration felt like mockery. Eduardo asked once if Santa would find them in their new place. Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she turned away to hide them. Roberto left the room, unable to bear the question he couldn't answer. The schools sent home notices about Christmas programs, asking parents to provide costumes. Maria folded the paper and put it away without comment. There would be no costumes, no programs, no celebration. They would be lucky to have food. Senora Dominguez had given them an ultimatum: pay the 4 months of back rent by Christmas or get out. They had 17 days and no options. Roberto tried everything. He went to every charity organization, every church, every government office. The answer was always the same: There were too many people who needed help. The funds were exhausted, the programs were full. Come back next month, next year, maybe never. He pawned his father's watch, the only thing of value he still owned, for $30. It wasn't enough to matter. Maria applied for a job as a supermarket cashier. The manager looked at her resume, which showed a 15-year gap for raising children, and said they needed someone with recent experience. She applied to be a cafeteria worker at the children's school. They wanted someone who could work split shifts, arriving at 5 in the morning and returning in the afternoon. Impossible when she had small children to care for. Every door closed as quickly as she knocked. The week before Christmas, they ran out of food. Not low on food, completely out. The electric burner sat cold and unused. The small box where Maria kept their supplies was empty, except for a few packets of salt. Eduardo and Sofia sat on their mattresses doing homework, their stomachs growling so loudly it echoed in the small room. Maria's hands shook as she folded and refolded the same blanket, over and over, because moving kept her from screaming. Roberto walked to the church, even though he hadn't been in weeks. Father Miguel was locking up for the evening, but stopped when he saw Roberto's face. They sat in the dim sanctuary, and Roberto told him everything. The job search, the hunger, the eviction, the darkness that was swallowing him whole. Father Miguel listened, his old eyes full of compassion, then opened a cabinet and pulled out a small bag of food donations: rice, beans, canned soup, bread. "It's not much," he said, "but it's what I have." Roberto carried the bag home like it was treasure. Maria cried when she saw it, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. That night, they had rice and beans, and it tasted like the finest meal any of them had ever eaten. Sofia ate slowly, savoring every bite, and Eduardo asked if they could say a prayer of thanks. Roberto's throat closed up, but he nodded, and they all held hands while Eduardo thanked God for the food in his child's simple voice. But even that small supply wouldn't last long. Christmas was 5 days away, and they had nothing. No money for rent. No money for food. No money for even the smallest gift for the children. Maria suggested they go to her sister's after all, admit defeat, and leave. But her sister lived 800 miles away, and they didn't even have money for bus tickets. On the evening of December 23rd, they sat in their cold room wrapped in blankets. Eduardo had drawn a Christmas tree on a piece of paper and taped it to the wall, decorating it with tiny drawings of ornaments. Sofia sang a Christmas carol in her small voice, one she'd learned at school, about peace and joy and hope. The words felt like salt in wounds, but Maria sang along, forcing brightness into her voice for her daughter's sake. Roberto couldn't take it. He stood abruptly and said he needed air. He walked the nighttime streets, his breath forming clouds in the cold, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Other homes glowed with Christmas lights, warm and welcoming. He could see families through windows, decorated trees, tables laden with food, children playing. A whole world of abundance that existed parallel to his family's suffering, close enough to see but impossible to reach. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from, and share this testimony so more lives can be blessed. Don't leave now. What's about to happen will reveal God's plan in the most extraordinary way. He found himself praying for the first time in months, not with words, but with raw desperation. God, if you're there, if you're real, my children are hungry. My wife is breaking. I have nothing left. I don't know what to do. Please, please. The prayer felt like shouting into an empty void, but he said it anyway, because there was nothing else left to try. When he returned to their room, Maria was sitting with the children, telling them a story about Christmas, about hope and faith and miracles. Her voice was gentle but strained, like violin strings pulled too tight. The children listened with wide eyes, wanting to believe in magic even though their reality taught them otherwise. Roberto sat down beside them, and Maria reached for his hand, squeezing it. They were together. Whatever came, they were together. Christmas Eve morning arrived gray and cold. They had one meal's worth of food left. Maria heated water for coffee made with reused grounds, weak and bitter. They had no bread, no sugar, nothing to soften the poverty of that breakfast. Eduardo and Sofia didn't complain. They'd learned not to complain. Senora Dominguez knocked at 9 o'clock sharp. "I want you out by tomorrow," she said through the door. "I have new tenants moving in the day after Christmas. You've had more than enough time." Maria opened the door and tried to reason with her, but the landlord's face was stone. "I'm not a charity, senora. Business is business. Be out by tomorrow." The door closed with finality. They spent the day in numb silence. There was nothing to pack because they had nothing. Their possessions fit in 2 small bags. By late afternoon, Roberto couldn't sit still anymore. He went outside and walked, just to move, to burn off the panic that was building in his chest. When he returned at dusk, he found Maria sitting on the floor with the children, all 3 of them crying quietly together. That broke him completely. Not anger, not despair, but a complete shattering of everything he'd been holding together. He knelt beside them and pulled them all close, and for the first time in months, he sobbed. Not silent tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of absolute devastation. His children clung to him, and Maria held them all, and they cried together in their cold room as night fell on Christmas Eve. When the tears finally stopped, they sat in exhausted silence. The room was dark now, lit only by the streetlight outside filtering through the thin curtain. Sofia was the first to speak, her voice small but clear. "Papa, can we pray?" Roberto looked at his 6-year-old daughter, this child who had every reason to give up hope, and something shifted in him. "Yes, mi amor, we can pray." They held hands in a circle on the floor. Eduardo started, thanking God for their family. Sofia prayed for food and for Papa to find work. Maria prayed for strength and faith. When it came to Roberto's turn, he couldn't speak for a long moment. Then, in a voice raw with emotion, he said, "God, I don't understand your plan. I don't understand why we're suffering, but we're your children, and we need you. We need a miracle. We need you to show up, because we have nothing left." The prayer hung in the air after he finished. Then came a knock at the door. They all looked at each other, startled. It was late, past 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Who would be knocking now? Roberto stood and opened the door. A man stood in the hallway, elderly and weathered, wearing tattered clothes that hung loose on his thin frame. His face was lined with age and hardship, but his eyes held a strange light, peaceful and knowing. "Forgive me for disturbing you so late," he said in a gentle voice. "I've been walking in the cold for hours. Would you have a place where an old man could rest for a while?" Maria appeared at Roberto's shoulder. She saw the man's condition, saw he was suffering from cold and exhaustion, and without hesitation she said, "Please come in. It's not much, but you're welcome to share what we have." The man entered slowly, as if each movement required great effort. They helped him sit on one of the mattresses, and Maria wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Sophia brought him their only cup, filled with water. The man drank deeply, then looked at each of them with those penetrating eyes. "Thank you," he said. "You show kindness to a stranger when you yourselves are struggling. That's true generosity." Roberto was struck by something in the man's voice, a quality he couldn't name. Dignity, perhaps, or wisdom. This wasn't just a homeless man seeking shelter. There was something more, something that made Roberto's heart beat faster, without understanding why. "What's your name, sir?" Maria asked, sitting across from him. "You can call me Emmanuel," the man said with a slight smile. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Then Eduardo, always observant, asked, "Are you hungry? We were just about to have dinner." It was a lie, and they all knew it, but Eduardo said it with such earnestness that the man's smile grew wider. "That would be kind," Emmanuel said. Maria stood and went to the small burner, her mind racing. They had the last of their food, barely enough for the four of them. But this man was hungry, cold, alone on Christmas Eve. She couldn't turn him away. She'd split their portions 5 ways and pray it was enough. As she prepared to cook what little they had, Emmanuel watched them. He saw Eduardo's shoes with holes, Sophia's too thin sweater, the bare walls, the poverty that saturated every inch of the room. He saw Maria's exhausted face, the weight she'd lost, the worry carved into her features. He saw Roberto's defeated posture, the shame of a man who couldn't provide for his family. "Tell me about yourselves," Emmanuel said quietly. "How did you come to be here?" Roberto hesitated, then found himself telling the story. The flood, the job search, the cascade of failures that had led them to this moment. Once he started, the words poured out, months of suppressed pain and frustration flowing freely. Maria added her own experiences, the doors that had closed, the jobs she couldn't get, the slow starvation of hope. The children listened, hearing for the first time the full weight of what their parents had been carrying. Emmanuel listened without interrupting, his expression compassionate, but not pitying. When Roberto finished, the old man was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You've been in the desert, friend, walking through wilderness with no water in sight. And still, you opened your door to a stranger. That tells me something important about your hearts." "We don't have much to offer," Maria said from the burner, her voice apologetic. "But what we have, we share." "That's everything," Emmanuel said. "In a world where so many have abundance and share nothing, you who have nothing share everything. Do you understand how rare that is? How precious?" Roberto felt tears prick his eyes again. This stranger's words touched something deep inside, a wound he hadn't known needed healing. Emmanuel turned to the children. "And you too? Have you been scared?" Sophia nodded, her eyes large. "Sometimes, when Mama and Papa are sad." "Being scared is normal," Emmanuel said gently. "But being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. And you've both been very brave." He looked at Eduardo. "I see you're an artist." Eduardo pointed shyly to his paper Christmas tree. "I wanted to make it nice for Christmas." "It's beautiful," Emmanuel said. "You have a gift. Never lose that. Even in darkness, You create beauty. That's a sacred calling. The words seemed too profound for a simple conversation, but they resonated in the small room like a bell ringing. Maria felt something stirring in her chest, a sensation she couldn't name. Hope? Peace? Or something beyond those words? She finished preparing the food and brought it over. 5 small portions that looked pathetic, divided across their plates. Emmanuel looked at the humble meal, then at Maria's face, which was trying so hard to maintain dignity. He reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Tell me," he said softly, "what do you fear most right now?" Maria's composure cracked. "Hunger," she whispered. "I fear my children going hungry. Tomorrow is Christmas, and I have nothing to give them, not even food. We'll be evicted in the morning. I don't know where we'll go or how we'll survive. I'm afraid, and I'm so tired of being afraid." Emmanuel's eyes filled with compassion so deep it seemed to pour from him like light. When everything is gone, when you have nothing left, what remains? "Faith," Maria said automatically, then stopped. "At least, it should be faith, but I'm struggling to hold on to it." "Faith isn't the absence of doubt," Emmanuel said. "Faith is trusting even when you can't see the way forward. You've shown more faith than you realize. You've kept your family together, kept loving, kept hoping, kept opening your door to strangers even when you're desperate. That's faith in action." He turned to Roberto. "And you, friend, what's the heaviest burden you carry?" Roberto's jaw clenched. "Failure. I'm 53 years old, and I can't provide for my family. I'm useless. Too old for anyone to want. Too worn out to start over. I've failed the people who depend on me most." "You haven't failed," Emmanuel said firmly. "You've endured. There's a difference. Failure is giving up. You've fought every day against impossible odds. You've kept showing up. You've kept trying. You've kept your family together with dignity and love. That's not failure, my friend. That's heroism." The words hit Roberto like a physical force. He'd been so focused on what he couldn't do that he'd never considered what he was doing. Enduring, surviving, loving his family through the darkest valley. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. If this story is touching your heart, share it to bless more lives. Leave a like and tell us in the comments, what moment has impacted you most? Emmanuel looked at all of them, his gaze holding each person. "I want to tell you something important. You're at the end of your rope. Tomorrow feels impossible. But I'm here to remind you that when humans see endings, God sees beginnings. When we see impossibility, He sees opportunity. When we see darkness, He's already preparing the dawn." "How can you know that?" Roberto asked, wanting to believe but afraid to hope. "Because I've walked many roads and seen many stories," Emmanuel said. "And the ones who endure, who keep faith even in the fire, are the ones who witness miracles. You're closer to breakthrough than you think." Maria felt something warm spreading through her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Despite their circumstances, despite tomorrow's eviction, despite the empty pantry, she felt inexplicable peace settling over her like a blanket. Emmanuel stood slowly, and they all rose with him. He moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Before I go, may I ask you something? Would you let me prepare Christmas dinner for you? A proper meal? A celebration of this holy night?" They stared at him, confused. "But there's no food," Maria said gently. We used the last of what we had." Emmanuel's eyes twinkled with that strange light again. "Do you trust me? Will you have faith for one more moment?" Something in his voice compelled agreement. They all nodded, not understanding, but unable to refuse. "Maria," Emmanuel said, "go to your cupboard, the one where you store food. Open it." "But it's empty," she protested. "I checked this morning. There's nothing there except salt." "Even so," Emmanuel said with infinite patience, "open it now." Maria walked slowly to the small cabinet mounted on the wall, the one they'd been calling a cupboard, though it barely deserved the name. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door. Behind her, Roberto held Eduardo and Sofia, all of them watching with held breath. She turned the handle and pulled the door open, and gasped. The cupboard was full. Not just full, but overflowing. Bags of rice and beans, cans of vegetables, pasta, sauce, flour, sugar, coffee, bread, fresh fruit that hadn't been there seconds before. Impossible, but undeniably real. Maria's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "How?" Roberto breathed, moving closer. "This isn't possible." "It was empty. We checked this morning." Emmanuel's smile was radiant now, transforming his weathered face into something luminous. With God, all things are possible, even filling empty cupboards, even restoring hope, even turning endings into beginnings. Sophia broke free from her father and ran to the cupboard, touching the food as if to confirm it was real. "Mama, look! Apples and oranges and chocolate!" She turned to Emmanuel with wonder shining in her eyes. "Are you magic?" Emmanuel knelt down to her level. "Not magic, little one. Grace. God's grace, which is more powerful than magic, more real than anything you can touch, and more constant than the sunrise. Your parents' prayers have been heard, and tonight, heaven responds." Maria fell to her knees, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she whispered, not to Emmanuel but to God. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Roberto joined her, pulling their children close, all of them crying now, but with joy instead of despair. Emmanuel moved toward the door. "Cook a feast," he said. "Celebrate this holy night. Remember that when you're faithful in the valley, God prepares a table before you." He opened the door, and cool night air swept in, carrying with it the scent of something indefinable, like incense and flowers combined. "Wait," Roberto called out, standing. "Who are you, really?" Emmanuel paused in the doorway, and for just a moment, the light around him seemed to intensify, as if the hall behind him had become luminous. His eyes, when they met Roberto's, held infinite depth, infinite love, infinite knowing. "I am the one who was born in poverty, who understands hunger, who knows what it means to have nowhere to lay his head. I am the one who sees every sparrow that falls, who counts every hair on your children's heads, who collects every tear you've cried. I am the one who never abandoned you, even when you couldn't feel my presence. I've been here all along, Roberto, in every closed door that was protecting you from the wrong path, in every delay that was positioning you for the right moment, in every painful lesson that was strengthening your faith for what comes next." The truth of who stood before them crashed over the family like a wave. This was no ordinary homeless man. This was Emmanuel, God with us. This was Jesus himself, walking among them in disguise, testing their hearts and finding them worthy. Maria crawled forward, reaching toward him, but Emmanuel raised his hand gently. Don't worship me here, daughter. Worship through living, through loving, through keeping your doors open to strangers, through staying faithful in the wilderness. That's the worship I desire. He looked at each of them one final time. Tomorrow, Roberto, you'll receive a phone call. Take it. Trust it. It's your answered prayer. Maria, within 3 days, someone will offer you work. Accept it. It's your door opening. Eduardo and Sofia, you'll return to school. But more than that, you'll carry this story with you. You'll remember the night heaven visited your home, and you'll tell others. That's your calling. But how will we? Roberto started to ask. Believe, Emmanuel interrupted gently. Just believe. You've survived the darkest night. The dawn is here. With that, he stepped through the doorway, and the door closed softly behind him. They all rushed to open it again, looking up and down the hallway. But it was empty. Emmanuel had vanished completely, as if he'd never been there at all. Only the scent remained, that inexplicable fragrance of incense and myrrh that had no earthly source. They turned back to their room, and the cupboard was still full, the food still there, solid proof that what had happened was real. Maria began to laugh, a sound of pure joy that burst from her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Roberto joined her, then the children, until all 4 of them were laughing and crying simultaneously, holding each other in their small room that suddenly felt like a palace. That night, they cooked. Maria prepared rice and beans, heated soup, sliced bread, and spread it with real butter that had appeared with the rest. They set their makeshift table with the few plates they had, and when they sat down together, Roberto said a prayer of thanksgiving that came from the deepest part of his soul. Father God, you visited us tonight. You came to us in our poverty and showed us we were never alone. You filled our cupboard and filled our hearts. You reminded us that faith isn't foolishness, that hope isn't naive, that love isn't wasted. Thank you for this food, for this miracle, for this reminder that you see us and you care. In Jesus' name, who walked into our home tonight, amen. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, talking and laughing. Eduardo telling silly jokes, Sofia singing Christmas carols, Maria and Roberto exchanging glances of wonder and gratitude. The food was delicious, the best meal any of them had ever tasted, seasoned with joy and faith and the presence of the divine that still lingered in their small room. After dinner, they didn't worry about tomorrow. They didn't pack or plan or fear the eviction that had loomed so large just hours before. Instead, they sang Christmas carols with Sofia's high voice and Eduardo's off-key harmony, and Maria and Roberto's tear-roughened tones blending into something beautiful and broken and holy. They sang until Sofia fell asleep mid-song, curled against her mother's side, a smile on her face for the first time in months. Roberto carried his daughter to her mattress and tucked her in with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Eduardo came and hugged him hard, surprising him with the strength in those small arms. "Papa," the boy whispered, "I knew God would help us. I knew it." "You had more faith than me, son," Roberto admitted. "Thank you for believing when I couldn't." That night, as they lay in the darkness, Maria whispered to Roberto, "Did that really happen? Did Jesus really visit us?" "Yes," Roberto said with certainty. "He did. And he told us tomorrow brings a phone call. I believe him." "I do too," Maria breathed. "I believe." They fell asleep holding hands, peace replacing anxiety, hope replacing despair, faith replacing doubt. And in the morning, on Christmas Day, at exactly 9 o'clock, Roberto's phone rang. It was Maestro Gonzalez, a master builder Roberto had worked with 15 years ago, someone he'd almost forgotten. "Roberto, is this still your number? I've been trying to find you for weeks. I'm starting a custom furniture company. High-end pieces for wealthy clients. I need a master carpenter, someone who understands real craftsmanship. I remembered your work. Are you available?" Roberto's hand shook so badly, he almost dropped the phone. "Yes," he managed. "Yes, I'm available." "Perfect. Come to my workshop tomorrow. We'll discuss salary. I'm thinking long-term, Roberto. Not day labor. A permanent position with benefits. I want to build something lasting, and I need someone with your skills and integrity. Can you start next week?" "Yes," Roberto said again, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, I can start." When he hung up, Maria was staring at him with wide eyes. "The phone call," she whispered. "He said there'd be a phone call." "He did," Roberto confirmed. "He told the truth." 3 days later, as Emmanuel had promised, Maria was at the small market buying groceries with money from Roberto's advance pay when the owner, Senora Torres, approached her. "I've been watching you," the woman said. "You're kind to everyone, patient with children, efficient. I need help managing my store. Morning shift, Monday through Friday. Would you be interested?" Maria accepted before the woman even finished speaking. Within a week, both parents were working steady jobs. The income wasn't extravagant, but it was enough. More than enough. They found a small apartment, modest but clean, with 2 bedrooms so the children didn't have to sleep on the floor. Eduardo and Sofia enrolled in school with new backpacks and supplies, their faces glowing with pride. But more than the material provisions, something deeper had changed in the Herrera family. They'd encountered the living God in their darkest hour, and that encounter transformed them from the inside out. Roberto worked with renewed purpose, creating furniture pieces that people traveled across the city to commission. His craftsmanship became legendary, not just for its quality, but for the spirit infused in each piece. Customers would comment on how furniture from Roberto's hands seemed to carry peace into their homes. Maria managed Senora Torres's store with excellence, but more importantly, she became known for her compassion. Every day, struggling families would come through the doors, and Maria would find ways to help, sometimes adding an extra item to their bags, sometimes offering encouraging words that carried the weight of someone who truly understood suffering. Her testimony spread through the neighborhood like fragrance. Eduardo's drawings became more frequent, more confident. He'd sketch scenes from that Christmas Eve, trying to capture the light in Emmanuel's eyes, the moment the cupboard opened to reveal abundance, the joy on his family's faces. His art teacher noticed the spiritual depth in his work and encouraged him to keep developing his gift. Sofia's laughter returned in full force, bright and contagious, filling not just their home, but everywhere she went. The Herrera family became known in their church community as living testimonies of faith. People who were struggling would seek them out, asking how they'd survived, how they'd kept believing. Roberto and Maria would tell the story carefully, truthfully, never exaggerating, but never diminishing the miracle either. They'd talk about the flood, the hunger, the desperation, the Christmas Eve visitor who changed everything. Some listeners would dismiss it as coincidence, explained away by psychology or chance. But others would see the truth shining through, the unmistakable fingerprints of divine intervention. And those who had ears to hear would be changed. their own faith strengthened, their own hope renewed. Father Miguel asked Roberto to speak at a Christmas service the following year. Roberto stood before the congregation, his carpenter's hands gripping the podium, and told their story. He spoke about doubt and faith, despair and hope, emptiness and provision. He talked about standing on that bridge, contemplating ending his life, then choosing to go home to his family. He described the knock on the door, the stranger who wasn't a stranger, the miracle in the cupboard. "I tell you this not to boast," Roberto said, his voice thick with emotion, "but to testify that God is real. He sees you. He knows your name. He walks through your darkness with you, even when you can't feel His presence. And when you reach the end of yourself, when you have nothing left to give, that's when His provision becomes most clear. Because it's not about our strength, it's about His faithfulness." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. After the service, dozens of people approached him, sharing their own struggles, asking for prayer, seeking hope. Roberto and Maria prayed with each one, remembering how Father Miguel had given them that small bag of food, how one act of compassion can save a life. They became instruments of grace, just as Emmanuel had been for them. The months turned into years, and the Herrera family's story became legend in their community. Eduardo grew into a young artist, whose works were displayed in galleries, each piece carrying themes of faith, redemption, and divine love. Sophia became a teacher, working with struggling children from poor families, offering them the same patient kindness her parents had shown to a stranger on Christmas Eve. Roberto's furniture business expanded, and he intentionally hired men his age or older, men whom other companies had discarded as too old. He knew their struggle intimately, and he gave them dignity, fair wages, and respect. His workshop became known not just for beautiful furniture, but for restoration of another kind, the restoration of men's spirits and purpose. Maria eventually opened her own small store, and she ran it with the same philosophy that had guided her life since that transformative Christmas. No one who came through her doors hungry left hungry. No one seeking help was turned away. She operated on the principle that everything she had was a gift from God, meant to be shared, and her generosity created ripples of change throughout the neighborhood. But they never forgot. Every Christmas Eve, the Herrera family would gather in their home, now comfortable and warm, with plenty of food and celebration. But before the festivities began, they'd observe a special tradition. They'd open their door and look outside, remembering the night a stranger knocked. They'd set an extra place at the table, just in case someone needed shelter. And they'd tell the story again to their children, and eventually to their grandchildren, ensuring that the testimony of God's faithfulness would pass from generation to generation. Roberto would hold up the leather tool bag that his father had given him, now lovingly restored and still in use. "These hands," he'd say, showing his weathered palms, "felt useless. But God had a purpose for them that I couldn't see." When you think you're too old, too worn out, too forgotten, remember that God wastes nothing. He'll use your very scars to heal others. Maria would show the old blanket they'd wrapped around Emmanuel that night, kept carefully preserved. "This covered the King of Kings," she'd say with wonder in her voice. "We thought we were helping a poor man, but we were entertaining Christ Himself." Never underestimate what God might do through simple acts of kindness. Never close your door to someone in need, because you never know when you're serving Jesus. Eduardo would display his drawings from that night, now framed and precious. Art isn't just about beauty, he'd tell his students. It's about bearing witness to truth. When you create, you're participating in God's creative nature. Use your gifts to tell stories that matter, to point people toward hope. And Sophia, with her infectious joy, would dance around the room just as she had that Christmas morning after the miracle. God loves you, she'd tell everyone she met. Not because you're perfect, but because He's good. When everything falls apart, He's building something new. Trust Him. The family's transformed life became a beacon in their community. They sponsored other families facing eviction, paying rent until people could get back on their feet. They provided groceries to those experiencing hunger, remembering all too well what that gnawing emptiness felt like. They mentored couples whose marriages were strained by financial pressure, offering not just advice, but the testimony of how they'd clung to each other in the darkest valley. Their church grew because people were drawn to the authentic faith they saw demonstrated in the Herrera family. Not a perfect, sanitized religion, but a gritty, tested, proven faith that had walked through fire and emerged refined. Young people especially were impacted, seeing that Christianity wasn't just about rules and traditions, but about a living God who intervenes in human suffering. Roberto lived to be 78 years old, working almost until the end, his hands creating beauty right up to his final days. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, hundreds attended his funeral, each person carrying a story of how Roberto's faith had impacted them. His casket was made by his own hands years before, a simple but exquisite piece that he'd crafted while meditating on mortality and grace. At the service, Eduardo stood to speak about his father. "My papa taught me that success isn't measured by wealth or status," he said. "It's measured by faithfulness. He was faithful when he had nothing. He was faithful when God provided. He was faithful in teaching, in loving, in opening doors to strangers. And now he's faithful in death, entering into the presence of the one who visited us that Christmas Eve so many years ago. Papa's not meeting Jesus for the first time. He's seeing him again." Maria lived another 5 years after Roberto, and she filled those years with continued service and love. On her final Christmas Eve, now 93 years old and surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, she told the story one last time. Her voice was weak, but her memory sharp, and she recounted every detail of that miraculous night when heaven touched earth in their poverty. "Never forget," she said to the gathered family, "that when you have faith, you're never truly poor. We had nothing that Christmas Eve, but we had everything that mattered. We had each other. We had love. We had enough faith to open our door to a stranger. And God honored that. He always does." She passed away 3 days later, peacefully, with Sophia holding one hand and Eduardo the other. Her last words were, "I see him. He's here. Emmanuel." And then she was gone, joining Roberto in the presence of the one who had saved them, sustained them, and transformed them. The story didn't end there. Eduardo wrote a book about his family's experience, which became a bestseller, touching millions of lives around the world. Sophia established a foundation that helped families facing eviction and hunger, providing both material assistance and spiritual support. The Herrera grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued the legacy, each one carrying forward the testimony of that miraculous Christmas Eve. In their old neighborhood, where the family's journey had begun, a small memorial park was established in honor of Roberto and Maria. At its center stood a sculpture that Eduardo had designed, a family of 4 figures with their door open, welcoming a stranger inside. The plaque read, "In memory of the Herrera family, who taught us that faith without action is dead, that poverty doesn't determine worth, and that when we serve the least of these, we serve Christ Himself." Every Christmas Eve, people would gather at that park, sharing food with those who had none, opening their hearts to strangers, telling and retelling the story of the family who encountered Jesus in disguise and was never the same. The testimony multiplied like bread and fish, feeding spiritual hunger wherever it was shared. And on quiet Christmas Eves, some people swore they could smell incense and myrrh drifting through the air, and they'd wonder if perhaps Emmanuel still walked among them, still visited the homes of the desperate and faithful, still transformed poverty into abundance and despair into hope. The truth is, He does. He always has. He always will. Because God is Emmanuel, God with us, not distant or uncaring, but intimately present in our suffering, walking beside us in the valley, providing when we've reached the end of ourselves. The Herrera family's story is extraordinary, but it's not unique. It's the story of every person who has ever cried out in desperation and found God faithful. It's the story of every family who has walked through fire and emerged with their faith refined. It's the story of a God who never abandons His children, even when we can't see or feel Him. If this testimony has strengthened your faith, share it so others can be blessed. Leave your like and tell us in the comments, what would you do if Jesus knocked on your door tonight? How has God shown His faithfulness in your own life? Where are you listening from? Drop an amen if this story touched your heart. The Herrera family learned that when you have nothing left but faith, you have everything you need. They learned that God's provision isn't always immediate, but it's always perfect. They learned that the darkest valleys often precede the greatest breakthroughs. They learned that when you open your door to strangers, you might be entertaining angels, or even Christ Himself. But most importantly, they learned that faith isn't the absence of struggle. Faith is trusting God in the middle of the struggle. It's believing when you can't see. It's hoping when circumstances say, there's no reason to hope. It's loving when you're exhausted. It's giving when you have nothing to give. It's opening your door when you're desperate yourself. That's the faith that moves mountains. That's the faith that opens heaven. That's the faith that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary testimonies of God's grace. And that's the faith that the Herrera family demonstrated on a cold Christmas Eve when they welcomed a stranger and found that they were welcoming their Savior. Their story echoes across time, a reminder that no situation is too desperate for God, no problem too big for His provision, no darkness too deep for His light to penetrate. When you're at the end of your rope, when the cupboard is bare, when tomorrow looks impossible, remember the Herrera family. Remember that God sees you. He knows your name. He counts your tears, and He's preparing something you can't yet imagine, because that's who He is. Emmanuel, God with us, yesterday, today, and forever, in our wealth and our poverty, in our strength and our weakness, in our faith and our doubt. He never leaves. He never forsakes. He always provides. He always redeems. He always transforms. And sometimes, just sometimes, He knocks on your door in disguise, testing whether you'll open it, whether you'll share what little you have, whether you'll demonstrate faith in action. When that moment comes, open the door wide, welcome the stranger, share your bread, offer your blanket, because you never know when you're serving Christ Himself. The Herrera family opened their door, and their lives were never the same. What would happen if you opened yours? Amen.